Chapter 15. Win this war, Teferi, Baron said, looking over the defensive works going up around the city. If we lose here, then the League is finished. The defensive works appeared to be on schedule. A series of trenches and traps grew under Baron's orders. Technically, General Majida was in charge. Baron had been surprised to see him alive. The landslides unleashed by the wizard's covering attack for the retreating army had buried the general, but he had dug himself out and fought his way through Keldon excavation teams to rejoin the League forces. When the army withdrew west to Arsenal City, it was Majida who commanded on the ground. The core of the League weapons development is here, and it's next to the path of the Keldons, Teferi said resignedly. If only it were further away. Arsenal City was in a flat valley near the coast. The surrounding hills were thick with mines. Metals and tufa flowed down for the city for industrial use. For generations, small factories turned out war machines for the Kapama League cities. The steel ants, crabs, and mantises were all manufactured there. A network of roads and a canal connected the factories to the rest of the League in the ocean port, but it was still isolated. Men and supplies took weeks to arrive. Will you be able to hold the walls with the men you have? Teferi asked. The wall enclosing the city was only 20 feet high, and years of maintenance and repair had been missed. A few sections had been raided for building material. Men under Baron's orders tore down houses inside the city to reclaim stones for the defensive works. We'll fight in the earthworks outside the walls, Baron replied. We need the fighting room. The factories inside the city can't produce with soldiers filling the streets. Even as the two friends looked out into the valley, a stream of fighting machines and weapons were being produced behind them. Technicians trembled with fatigue and warehouses emptied as the factory squeezed out every last ounce of production. I'll have a few words with the war machine builders before I go, Teferi said. I'll bring back supplies to the men we need. Is your glide bomb project any closer to success? Nearly, Baron replied. With the new Keldon fire barges out there, blimps just can't survive long enough to drop bombs. If we can work out a few production headaches, we'll have a weapon we can use from airships. I'm surprised Rain not working on the problem, Teferi said. I hear she's scouting outside the city? Teferi was stuffing the notes and maps he had brought into a travel case. Baron looked out toward the horizon. Rain returned to check on a pattern of blight in the northwest. She thinks it might be related to Keldon attacks, Baron said distractedly. She thinks it might signal some new Keldon weapon or destructive spell. She thinks it's important to find out what's affecting the land. Teferi waited a moment, then shook his head. He left the wizard lost in thought, staring out over the defensive works growing slowly as scared soldiers wielded their shovels. Are they inside yet? Rain asked. The scout shook his head. Rain looked to either side of her. 10 runners crouched in the bottom of a ditch. A few hundred yards away, a small Keldon land barge was stopped in front of an abandoned farmhouse. Hopefully the Keldon riders would dismount and search the farmhouse for food, giving Rain and her group an opportunity to attack. You sure that barge contains the blight? Rain pressed. Shalonda was haggard from days in the field and the strain of trying to find the source of the disease showing throughout the central forests. Finally, the healer found a trace to follow, and it led to the farmhouse. But the Keldon barge had proved an unpleasant surprise. Rain was searching for signs of plant contagion, not looking for combat. The scouts had withdrawn into a shallow gully and knelt their machines. Then her aide gave her more bad news. I'm sure there's a concentration of blight on board that vehicle. Maybe we could identify the source and find out where it comes from, Shalonda said. Rain shook her head and glanced at the scout watching the disembarking Keldons. If only Jamuraan were still here. The woman had expected to find a particularly thick or heavy concentration of disease, not a vehicle filled with armed men. Jamuraan and the rest of the scouts were strung out toward the east. Rain did have a group of steel ants attached to one of the scouts. The League was experimenting with long-range raiding parties, and the scout was evaluating how well the war machines kept up with the Talarian runners. Combat was something to avoid, but now a key piece of the puzzle might lie only yards away. There was no choice. Rain needed to capture the barge. "I think they're all outside the vehicle," the scout whispered down. "They're starting to search the outbuildings now. They won't be there much longer." Rain knew it was time to attack. "Shalanda, stay alert for any sign of magic. Worry about the wounded after we've won," Rain admonished her aide. Then she waved and brought her runner up out of the gully. The line of runners crested the lip of the depression in a ragged line and silently charged the Keldons. Halfway to the farmhouse, a warrior saw the scouts and bellowed a warning. The barge was small and the upper wooden shield was open. 8 of the runners unleashed a barrage of bolts into the interior, killing whatever crew remained inside. Boxes of cargo shattered as the runners' projectiles smashed through the vehicle and impacted against the walls of the house. 4 scouts dismounted, drawing weapons and throwing themselves into the barge to secure it. Rain and the scout commanding the ants swept around the Keldon vehicle. The enemy warriors converged on the stone and timber farmhouse, diving through the door as Rain unleashed her bolts. Retreating warriors sprawled in sliding falls as they died at full run. The League Scout drove his steel ants before him like a pack of hounds. The war machines piled onto the warriors, mandibles tearing at limbs and weapons. A Keldon held off an ant as his fellow struck off its limbs. The ant had its revenge as it amputated the man's arms. 2 ants worried at a warrior like dogs with a toy, leaving a trail of blood and gore as they grappled with the corpse. Rain and another scout brought their runners into the melee, triggering metal wings. The blades cut through the armor and flashed as the Talarian machines circled. The Keldons outside were dead, but their sacrifice allowed their companions to complete their retreat into the house. The door slammed shut. The sounds of furniture being piled in a barricade could be heard. The ants shifted in front of the building, and a few circled around the side, searching for access. The house appeared stout, and Rain could see movement through a few narrow windows. She rode back to the Keldon vehicle. The rest of her party surrounded the small land barge. They had captured the craft with no losses, and Shalanda examined the interior and its cargo. The other scouts had remounted and stood ready to continue the attack. Rain considered what to do. She had achieved her primary objective, but there was still a party of armed enemy warriors to deal with. Storming the house seemed a bad idea as sounds of barricade building continued. "Can you move the barge farther back from the house?" Rain called to Shalanda. "I don't think so," she replied. "The Keldons have turned off the motivating force. This isn't going to move an inch without their cooperation." A crossbow bolt shot from the house and embedded itself in the upper shell supports. Shalanda hopped out of the vehicle and crouched behind the barge's legs. Another shot skimmed along the ground and rebounded off of a runner's legs. "Apparently they're not going to cooperate," Rain said as she signaled the other scouts to crowd against the barge and crouch their machines so the Keldon vehicle blocked shots. "Call back your ants," Rain ordered the ant handler. The steel ants still circled the house and dug at the walls, but the scout called them back with a whistle. They came at good speed, but one collected a bolt that crippled its rear legs. It dragged the dead limbs as it continued on the other 4. "We need to see if the Keldons are exiting the rear of the house," Rain said and pointed to a League soldier. "Circle around and check if our reluctant friends are doing anything. Keep your eyes open for enemy reinforcements." The scout looked apprehensive as he turned and raced away. He stopped and began riding in a circle to stay out of the range of the crossbows. "Reload weapons," Rain ordered. The scouts paired off. Leaning far to the side, a rider could just feed fresh bolts to another person's runner while keeping behind cover. Rain guided her machine to her aide, who was popping her head up to look inside the barge in quick glances. "What do you think?" "I need only a few more minutes to examine the barge," Shalanda replied. "There are crates of vegetation, a few sealed boxes that seem related to the blight, but somehow different. If only I could open the crates, perhaps if I'm quick enough." Rain shook her head. "Without heavy shielding, it's just too dangerous," the scholar said. "If we can't move the barge, we'll have to clear out the house. If I lie on the floor of the barge, I should be safe enough," Shalanda insisted. "Eventually, the Keldons are going to realize that we want the barge and its contents," Rain said. "I expect a barrage of burning crossbow bolts will soon follow. We need to move now. Save your energy for healing and investigating the barge. I don't know how soon Keldon reinforcements might arrive." Rain turned her machine toward the other scouts who gathered around her. They crouched lower as another crossbow bolt sailed through the barge and off into the distance. Scout began feeding bolts into Rain's machine. "We need a plan of attack." "We could send in the ants to open the walls," offered one scout. "It would take time, but we could drive them out. The ants could chew through heavy walls, but it was slow." "We need to end this fast so Shalanda can finish examining the cargo," Rain replied. The ant handler reached into a saddlebag and drew out a metal cylinder. "If I could get some covering fire, I could burn them out." The scout was carefully taking the container apart. A fragile pottery vessel lay inside. The other scouting parties captured a fire barge last week. I and a few others decided to test some of the munitions. Should start a fire without Shalanda expending herself. Everyone go around to the right side of the barge and fire your bolts into the windows facing us, Rain ordered and then pointed to the handler. Go around the right side of the machine and run up to the right-hand corner of the house. Stay clear from the front windows or you might be shot. The scouts quickly jockeyed for position, and Rain gave the signal. 8 runners darted out and unleashed a steady barge of bolts. 2 crossbow bolts came from the house, one sinking into a scout's arm. Blood spurted out of a cut artery, and the man sent his machine back behind the barge. Shalanda pulled him out of the saddle and in seconds was locked in a healing trance. Meanwhile, the ant handler's machine reached the house. One ant followed, like a dog after a horse, trying to keep up. The scout paused at the corner and threw the captured Keldon munitions onto the building. The pottery broke, and a thick, oozing, molasses-like liquid slowly coated the wall. The scout and the accompanying ant raced back for cover. "Back behind the barge!" Rain called. The scouts retreated. The ant handler dismounted and crawled onto the deck of the barge. He creeped forward, dragging his launcher behind him. Then he sat up and fired a light rocket toward the house, aiming at the liquid soaked into the timber and coating at the stone's base. The projectile blew a hole only a hand's breadth wide, but ignited the fluid. Within seconds, the fire caught and spread over the house. The hole left by the rocket seemed to suck the fire inside, and Rain could hear Keldons screaming inside. Smoke poured from around the barricaded door and windows. Warriors threw shutters open and tried to breathe and then crawl through the small openings. The handler rolled to the backside of the barge and whistled the ants to him. The war machines milled below and then, at his direction, ran toward the burning building. The warriors inside forced open the door, kicking the remnants of the barricade into the yard. They exited coughing and crawling. Each warrior must have been nearly blind from the smoke, and many waved swords wildly against attackers they couldn't see. Like helpless kittens, they died under the implacable jaws of the war machines. Ants hauled the bodies away, tearing at the dead flesh. "Circle and pick off anyone on the other side," Rain ordered. "Keep an eye out for that crossbow." She sent her machine toward the house, swinging wide to see around the building. The ant handler remounted and accompanied her. Shalanda was already searching through the crates. Rain watched the house burn. The smoke poured out so thickly it was hard to see the building. A Keldon and servant tore out a window frame and stumbled clear, coughing and teary-eyed, but both carrying loaded crossbows. The ant handler bolted them, and they dropped, twisting as they fell so they lay against the wall. "They came a long way to die," Rain said. Burning pieces of the shutters fell onto the bodies, igniting their clothes. "Well, I didn't invite 'em," the handler replied. The building was totally engulfed in flames, and the roof collapsed into the building's interior. The handler whistled the steel ants together and headed back to the captured barge. Rain smelled the roasting flesh and wondered how many more lives would be destroyed in the war. At last, she turned her machine and started for her aid just to see what they had captured. "I found the source of what I sensed earlier," Shalanda said. She kicked open a crate and out poured dead ground squirrels. Each tiny corpse had been covered with a layer of preservative and the bodies stuck together like melted hard candy. "The animals all died without a mark. The other special crates contain other species of dead animals and samples of dead vegetation." "So animals are being targeted now as well as plants?" Rain said. "How are they spreading the disease?" "I can't tell without doing more research. I can use these samples to complete my own investigation." She looked at the crates with a more speculative eye. "Rain, they may not be spreading the blight at all." "There is a connection," Rain said. "They're driving people off the land and the war is destroying what's left." Rain looked at the burned-out shell of the farmhouse. "They are a disease that is killing this land."